Hi, this is Jess Lahey coming to you with the Gift of Failure Frequently Asked Questions video series, episode 3. So one of the most common questions I get, frequently asked questions, is about when we should let kids quit. So here's the deal with letting kids quit. So my opinion has to do with my priorities. So I talk to a lot of parents about, they come up to me and they say, our daughter has been doing soccer since she was 4, and now suddenly she says she doesn't like it anymore and she wants to quit. Or it's really, really hard to get my kid to practice piano, and he says that he doesn't want to do it anymore and he really wants to quit. So I think one of the first things you have to do is realize that sometimes it is okay to quit. But that's all going to come down to your priorities as a family. So one of the priorities that I have in my family, that we have in my family, is relationships. And so my little anecdote about quitting and priorities and how that all goes down in my family comes down to that priority of sort of connecting. So my son, Ben, who is now 19 and off to college, when he was younger, I decided that he needed to learn to play piano, because that's clearly, in order to be good at math, you must play a musical instrument, that knowing about music makes you much more disciplined and blah, 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 blah. And I'm sure all of that is true. So I fell victim to that, and I thought, well, great, we'll get him some piano lessons. And our next door neighbor up the street happened to have a piano, and he gave us that piano, and we rolled it from his house down the hill to my house, and it got installed in my house thanks to some very strong neighbors of mine and the fact that we were downhill. And so we have what's called the honeymoon period, where we got these piano lessons for my son and everything went great and he's all excited about learning how to play piano, until he wasn't, until he realized that, oh man, I can't play that very complicated song that I was hoping I'd be able to play by the 3rd lesson. And it gets frustrating. It's hard to play a musical instrument at first, especially when you play a musical instrument that doesn't necessarily sound great in the beginning, like, clarinet and violin. At first, it's a little screechy and scary. So we started fighting. We started fighting about whether he'd practice, when he'd practice. Please practice. And he'd say, I don't want to practice. I don't want to play piano. And then it became a thing. And that thing started undermining our relationship. And for me, according to the priorities in my family, that was unacceptable. Now, for some families, music is what the whole family is about. So not being musical is just not an option. I have friends for whom being athletic is just what the family's about. You're outside and athletic and endurance athletes, and that's what they're all about. And so that's a priority in their family. And so having a bit of struggle around that might be more worth it to them. And I totally respect that. I mean, I know I was just reading an article about Michaela Schifrin that was in the New Yorker. She's actually from our neck of the woods, from New Hampshire. And in that article, they were talking about what the family did to get her where she is. And that's just, they have different priorities in their family. And Michaela is awesome, and her mother Eileen is incredible. But that's not necessarily the way our family operates. So come up with your priorities in your family. And if those priorities, if the thing you're trying to get your kid to do is really important to your family, then you're going to have a little more tolerance for the strife around it. So to continue the piano story, so once I decided that it wasn't, being able to, having my kid be, mildly proficient at piano wasn't really going to be worth the undermining it was doing to our relationship, I let the piano thing go. I let it go. And I literally let it go because my neighbor down the street, my sucker neighbor down the street, she wanted the piano because her kids were slightly younger. And so we wheeled the piano down to her house. The piano can only go downhill. It's definitely not going back uphill. So as long as people down the hill have younger children, we're all set. The piano went down the hill to her house, and it was no longer a part of our family. And he didn't do piano anymore. He did do saxophone for a while for school, and liked that. He really did enjoy saxophone. He wasn't, taken off and playing it at every moment, but he did like it. Okay, fast forward to a few years later, and he becomes enamored with the guitar. because my husband plays guitar. And this was also more evidence for sometimes just the things that you have around your children. Like if reading is important to you, then just the fact that books are all over the house might be a big factor in whether or not your kids read. My husband plays the guitar, and so my son heard him and thought, oh, maybe I'll play the guitar. So we got lessons for my son, and I decided to do that along with him, which was excruciating because I wasn't ever as good as he was, and I didn't improve very quickly. Until he didn't enjoy taking lessons anymore, and we figured out something really important about him. He does not enjoy working with an instructor one-on-one. It's just not his thing. He likes working on his own time, on his own schedule. He likes pacing himself. He likes teaching himself. So we stopped with the instructor, and we found something online called Jam Play, where he was able to sign up and pick the instructor he liked and pick the style of music he liked, and he could go at his own speed on the lessons. That worked beautifully for him, and he really got good at the guitar. He's actually quite good now, and he's really proud of that because that's something that was initiated by him that he really pushed himself to get better at. What was really funny about the guitar thing is that after a while he said, we have this town listserv where people can get rid of old stuff and sell things and get help with things. And he said, if a keyboard were to come on the listserv for not much money, then I might be interested in going back to piano. And right at that moment, I was like, Providence, a keyboard came up on the listserv, someone was moving, and we got this beautiful keyboard that we have since actually passed on to someone else. And he taught himself piano. When I say taught himself piano, he had the basics down from, guitar and saxophone. He knew about notes and stuff from music class. And he taught himself he picked songs he liked, and then he just pushed himself to learn them, and totally under his own steam. And at that point, I realized what I needed to do was just keep my sticky mom fingers off of it. Keep my, as I sometimes call it, my mom stink off of that. Because as I've discussed in the past, as I discuss in the book and as I've discussed in other of these videos, one thing we know about extrinsic motivators that come from outside of us, if we're trying to get kids to do stuff because we pay them to do it, or because we have a sticker chart that every time they practice, they get a gold sticker. Those forms of motivation do not work over the long term. They work in the short run for the honeymoon period. They do not work over the long term. And there's lots of research. In fact, if you read Dan Pink's Drive, if you read Edward Dece's Why We Do What We Do, The Science of Self-Motivation. If you look at the research since Drive came out, we have 40 years of really, really good research on, and not just that, we have studies on the studies about why extrinsic motivators are a killer for motivation. That if you want your kid to not want to do something, the fastest way to make that happen is to sticker chart it to death or pay them. And forgive the dogs downstairs. I'm at KJ's house, so those are her dogs barking, and that was the vacuum you heard earlier. It's just how it works. I don't have a place to record in my house, so we get dogs. So what does work? Oh, and by the way, extrinsic motivators are not just a killer for motivation, they are a killer for creativity. If you want your children to be less creative, to invest less time in a creative endeavor, pay them for it, or offer them a blue ribbon, or that kind of thing. There's a bunch of studies on children and adults showing that when we reward kids for things extrinsically, when we reward them for their creative endeavors, they're less creative, they spend less time on it, they're less personally invested. So what we want is intrinsic motivation. What my son had going on when he really wanted to learn guitar himself, when he really wanted to learn piano for himself, that's intrinsic motivation. That's motivation that comes from within. And the highest form of that is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's flow. It's that state you get into when time and space fall away, when it's just you and the activity, and suddenly 3 hours have gone by and you have no idea where that time went because you've been loving what you're doing. In order to get intrinsic motivation, that's all in the book. You're going to have to go to the book for that, or come to one of my speaking events. I go in great detail into what we need to do to promote intrinsic motivation in kids. But this comes back around to the question, do we let kids quit when they're not intrinsically motivated to do something? Well, I want to give you a little bit of developmental framework for that. It's really easy. It's easier to get little kids to do stuff that we want them to do. They're focused on us for for the way we talk, how much we love them when they do the things we want them to do. That's love based on performance. That happens to be a bad thing, but anyway, or withdrawal of love when our kids don't perform the way we want them to do. That's a really bad thing. But we also reward them, by just saying, yay, I love it so much when you do whatever, or give them the sticker charts or whatever that thing is. It's much easier to get little kids to do that stuff because they're internally focused. They're internally focused on themselves internally, but also just their family and the people that are closest to them. As our kids get bigger, they start focusing outward. They start thinking more about social stuff. Their hormones kick in, and suddenly they're really worried about all those other people out there, and social life becomes more important. When I go to schools and I talk to kids in advance of talking to their parents in the evening, I ask the kids to tell me what they want me to tell their parents. What do you want me to share with your parents when they come tonight? A really common thing I get is, could you please tell my parents that just because I've been doing swimming or soccer or croquet or violin since I was 4, that doesn't mean I need to do it forever. And I hate it now and I don't want to do it anymore. So please tell my parents that it's okay for me to quit. And, there are some kids out there that really, really loathe the sports and music and whatever it is that they're doing, but they do it because their parents are making them do it. And the reply I tend to get back from parents is, yeah, but we have so much invested. My kid's been doing it since she's 4 and she's now 14. We have 10 years invested in music or sports or whatever it is. At that point, I really have to turn it around and say, you use this word investment like you think there's going to be a return on your investment at some point. What is that return you're expecting for your investment? Because if you're expecting your kid if your kid is really, truly good enough to get a music scholarship, then great. If your kid is really, truly good enough to get an athletic scholarship, great. But I send a lot of people to a New York Times article called Your Child is Not Going to Play Sports in College. Now what? Because statistically speaking, that's true. That's likely for more people than kid getting a scholarship to play a sport in college. What is the return on your investment? Why is it so important to you that your kids stick with soccer? Is it because you just don't want your kid to be a quitter? Well, again, I'm going to talk in the podcast I recorded with KJ earlier today. I talked about the book Finish by John Acuff. And in that book, he talks about the fact that we can't know whether or not something is for us until we try it. So we can't know whether or not we want to quit until we've tried it for a while. So why we see quitting as such a bad thing, I'm not quite sure. Like I could go out there today and say, I want to try welding and I want to become a really good welder, but maybe I get 2 lessons in and I realize, oh my God, I hate welding. I'm claustrophobic in the helmet and I don't like the sound and whatever. That's okay for me to quit at that point. Why isn't it? Parents tend to say, oh, but you'll let your team down, or, oh, but you'll let your coach down, or, oh, but you'll let us down. I pressure some parents to think a little bit harder about that. I'm going to poke a little bit and ask you to think about whether or not not letting your kid quit is because you want your kid to fulfill some goal that you didn't fulfill. Maybe you wish your parents had forced you to play piano. I hear this a lot. Someone said to me recently, I really wish my parents had forced me to play piano because I would be so good now. Well, maybe not. If you're not in it because you want to be in it, maybe you wouldn't be a really great piano player. I don't know. Plus, that puts a lot of onus on your parents. I don't want my kid to get to 22 and say, if you had just really made me practice piano, I'd be at Juilliard by now. Based on your reaction when you were 8 and fighting me every single day to play the piano, I'm going to say no, you wouldn't be at Juilliard now. Are these your goals? Are they your child's goals? Are you asking your child to fulfill some fantasy of where you might have been if only. Our children are not extensions of us. They are not mini us's to go to the college that you really wish you'd applied to if you'd just not known more, or that you just wish you'd gotten into if you just studied a little harder. Our kids are not us. Our kids are their own people. And you may love basketball, but your kid may not. So when it comes time to quit, I think you need to think about your priorities as a family. You need to think about your kids' priorities. You need to think about where they are developmentally. And you need to think about what your agenda is with these goals for your kids. Do you want your kids to do things because you truly want your kid to be fulfilled and happy? Or do you want your kid to do it because you want bragging rights or the ability to say, oh, finally, I, through my child, fulfilled X, Y, or Z? So should you let your kid quit? I wish there was an easy answer, and I wish I could just be black and white and say, yes, let your kid quit. But I think it comes down to our priorities, it comes down to our goals, and it comes down to our happiness, and it comes down to our relationships with our kid. I'm really happy I let my kid quit piano, and frankly, I think the fact that I let him quit piano helped him discover guitar. And maybe he's even a better piano player now than he would have been if I'd forced him. I do know that our relationship is really good, and I do know that we talk about things that are really important to us, and I don't tend to do a lot of nagging. So I'm happy with that decision, and I hope you're happy with the decisions you make, because that's really what it comes down to. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate all the listens and the new subscriptions. I couldn't be more thrilled. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Jess Lahey. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, I'm at Teacher Lahey. And I'm on Facebook. And again, thank you. If you want to email me a question that I could get to in one of these videos, you can go ahead to jessicalahey.com, go to the About and Contact Me, and just send me a question, and I'll hopefully get to it in a future podcast. I'm going to hit, in a video podcast. I'm going to hit all of the frequently asked questions first, and then I will narrow it down and hit the sort of more specific questions I get less often. Thank you so much for watching today. Thanks. Bye.